Hey guys, John deRoulet here, Head of Revenue Management Education at Wheelhouse. And today we're going to do a data deep dive into Mammoth Lakes and Yosemite. Really excited to do this data deep dive with you guys. We're going to look at a bunch of market data and see how the market has been performing in the past, what's going on this summer, and talk a little bit about the strategies that we can employ to kind of react to what we're seeing in the market. There's been a lot of pressure across a ton of US markets this year, and so it's really important to be in touch with what's going on, not only for your own revenue management strategy, but also to talk to owners, to talk to other team members, that sort of thing. So really excited to show this data to you, and let's get going. Before we get started today, I do want to point out to you that all the data we're going to be using is from Wheelhouse, and much of this data is freely accessible to anyone who makes a Wheelhouse account, whether or not you're a Wheelhouse pricing customer. We're going to be leveraging a lot of high-level market reports, and this can all be accessed in Wheelhouse for free for any market across the world that we cover. We may also have some time to go into neighborhood-level data. Neighborhood-level data is available through Wheelhouse's dynamic sets, which has lots and lots of free data availability. In addition to that, I'm going to be talking a ton about pace, a ton about what's going on in your own portfolio, things that are really important to compare to when you're looking at market data. If you don't have access to really good tools that will show you your pace, that will show you your historicals, that will show you how you're doing compared to last year and how you're doing compared to the market, Wheelhouse does actually offer an entire business intelligence suite for free called our Performance Insights that will give you all of this information at your fingertips for any group of listings, all at a glance. Whether you want to see how your occupancy is building up at the weekly level or even dig all the way down into the daily level, you can see this for any group of listings at the tip of your fingertips. In addition to that, you can show where you were as of this time last year to really see exactly where your pace is coming in, as well as comparing this to your market data. It's a great opportunity, and all of this is free. All you have to do is sign up with Wheelhouse and connect your account. You don't have to be a Wheelhouse pricing customer to access this data. If you would like access, sign up or send us a message. We're happy to help you get set up. In addition to that, we do provide free training, including training and an entire guide on the processes we suggest using so that you can integrate really good revenue management practices for an extra hour or so a week that will really have an impact on your portfolio. Okay, that's enough about the product. Let's dive into some market data. Okay, I have the Wheelhouse market report pulled up here for Yosemite National Park, the Wheelhouse market in Wheelhouse, and I also have the Mammoth Lakes Wheelhouse market pulled up. We're going to start with Yosemite National Park, and this market report is going to be a great kind of like high-level look into the general trends that are going on. If you wanted to take a little bit more of a neighborhood-level work, you would use your dynamic sets. We may or may not have time to do that today, but for now, just kind of understanding the general market trends is going to be really helpful. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on trends, which is going to give us some really great graphs that show year over year and month over month for specific KPIs. I'm going to start here with adjusted occupancy because I think occupancy is one of the top things to show in one of these situations. At the end of the day, occupancy really does represent demand. It tells you what the consumer is doing, how that demand is actualizing in the market, and it's a really great way to see what is, going well and what is under pressure. In addition to that, this month over month, year over year look is a really clear way to get a lot of information, right? I use this one because it's not so granular that it's really confusing. You can really see how things have been going, and you can see it for quite a lot of time. So I have 2024 and 2025 pulled up. This is a great way for us to see some general seasonal stuff, what's going on right now. And another reason I like to use this graph is, honestly, it's really good for owners. There's a lot of KPIs in our business. As you can see, there's just a sample here. And a lot of owners aren't going to be close enough to the industry to understand everything that's going on. But at the end of the day, an owner understands if occupancy is down, right? If occupancy is down, it means it's harder to get bookings. It means that those prices might be changing. And so I think occupancy is a great place to start because you get an understanding of demand for yourself, and also you can use it to communicate to owners or other executives in the country. Now, for Yosemite National Park, we can see here the general seasonality is primarily a summer season. So we're really getting most of our business in the summer with winter being the low, and then a little bit of a buildup in the spring, although it's a little weaker. And the way that fall kind of comes together is a little bit stronger than the spring. So in terms of order of seasonality, we have summer, which you guys all know, summer, fall, spring, winter, right? And looking at last year's occupancies compared to this year, we can kind of see that January started out pretty decent. Now, it's a very low season, so many people are already vacant, so not many people would have noticed much of a difference. But there was a little bit of a growth in occupancy here. Let me pull up 2026. A little bit of a growth in occupancy, but very marginal, so really just stable. That's kind of something that was very consistent across markets all over the country, right? Basically, January started out good. If you went to DARM or Verma and were hearing about the market data in Q4 last year, early booking for 2025 actually looked really, really good in 2024. So people were pretty optimistic. There was some signals there indicating that there might be some trouble, but in general, pacing was really good. However, once we get into February, we start to see some attrition, right? Again, February is a low season month, so many people wouldn't have probably noticed that attrition, but you do see at the market level that there's a little bit of a drop in occupancy, a little bit more than 10% of the overall occupancy on the books, so in some ways, a pretty significant drop. And that starts to appear in February and really just maintains as we go through the year, right? March sees a pretty substantial drop in occupancy. However, March could be due to the move of Easter partially. We do see that a lot of that occupancy is recovered in April. However, it doesn't replace, it's actually down very slightly, and it doesn't replace the losses in occupancy in March. So 4 months into the year, it seems to be pretty clear that there's a missing contingent of consumers and that the occupancy situation in the market's under pressure. Moving forward from there, we get into May and June. Those both continue to see a little bit of a drop in occupancy, in some cases substantial, like in May, although it does get a little better in June. So short answer here is pretty much through 2025, the occupancy of the market has been under pressure. Now, this is not something that's totally like unique to Yosemite or even California markets. Starting in about March, a lot of markets around the country, sans maybe some of the ski markets, it's a little different. But a lot of markets around the country started seeing pressure on their occupancy. The consumer was not willing to pay what they were paying early on. We saw a lot of pacing issues and people really started to panic. Now, that hasn't fully recovered in many markets, but it has seemed to stabilize a little. But that being said, there are a lot of markets still under pressure. So it's a very, very competitive environment. We no longer can really charge the COVID highs with premiums. The consumer is really waiting till the last minute to book. There's a number of reasons for that. Part of it could be that consumers don't want to book too early with the uncertainty. Part of it could be that we have trained the consumers to wait till rate drop. Addition to that, I think that the consumer themselves are just under a lot of pressure from a price perspective. And it's not so much that they're waiting for you to drop your price, it's that they're purchasing at the price that they can afford. So that does align. As people drop their price, we see a big influx of last minute bookings, but there's a little bit of a chicken or the egg there. Is the consumer waiting on us to drop the price, or are consumers just not purchasing until prices are more reasonable? Now, the big question is what's going on now and what's going on in the future, right? Because, this kind of backdrop of, hey, the market's been under occupancy pressure for the last 4 months is going to be useful. It helps us kind of understand, like, hey, do I need to extrapolate this forward? Do I need to take a more conservative approach to my revenue management? But the important thing here is, like, how is July coming together? July has about 54%, 55% on the books. That puts us down about 10%. So almost 15% of what we did last year left to go in the market. And we have a little bit less than 2 weeks. So to me, it looks a little bit tight there, right? We do know that booking windows in the short term have been pretty strong. So it's possible that we could reach these occupancy levels from last year. But it's not a guarantee by any means. Now, it's not super obvious on this chart, but I did pull up the actual pace information for you guys. What I did is I did use the data that's available here in our free tools. I went over to this historical page, which does show us daily stuff, so we can really break down. You can see, this was Easter last year. Easter this year was pretty strong, but not quite as long. So you can see those kind of differences in a minute level. But for this purposes for pace, I went down to this distribution chart on the left, and I selected lead time, and I went and figured out how much was on the books for July at this time. So around 20 days or 15 days, 13.6. So that means there is about 84% left to book. Did a little math and got to the pace. And so where were we last year at this time? When we're looking at Yosemite in July, we were at about 59%, right? So a little bit closer to that 64%. We really only booked 6% left in the last 2 weeks. And that means the market is pacing a little bit behind. This gap that we've seen, at least in June, which is about 5% down, seems to be appearing again in July. It does seem to be a little bit better than May, which was almost a full 10% down. But July is still pacing behind with very, very little time left, right? Now, if we look at the booking windows for last year, the market put on about 6%. So that will put us at about 60%. So there's still quite a bit of booking left to go. And granted, we may see a little extra booking because those booking windows seem to be getting shorter. But the short answer here, July is following suit and pacing behind. Now, when we look forward into August and September, the seasonality is going to start to tilt down, but it's a much slower tilt down. These still remain fairly strong months. And at 22%, we're almost halfway there, and we haven't quite started the month, which to me looks, that's pretty okay. I would like to see things like a big red flag for me is if a market doesn't have 50% of its year-over-year occupancy when you start the month. That's very obvious to me that it's going to be a struggle. You usually want to be closer in a higher season to that 60 or even 70%. And, but as we get into these these shoulder seasons, we do see booking windows tend to be shorter than a true high season. So where were we last year? Last year at this time, we were at 31%. So we were well over halfway. We were at that 60% mark roughly. So the market is actually pacing very far behind in August. This is stretching from July to August. Should be a big red flag. And this is something that you really want to do is check your own pacing, right? We're looking at the market. We know that the market is pacing behind, the market is down. To me, that indicates, well, that means the market's probably going to start changing price really quick. And a lot of people who have vacancy are going to be competing in the short window. How your portfolio is pacing is really going to affect this, right? If you're pacing really well right now and you're pretty confident and you're looking at it every week, you may not make drastic adjustments, right? Or you may know like, hey, in a couple of weeks, I really do need to consider this really strong because I know other people might start adjusting because there's vacancy and pace problems. But, if you're pacing really poorly now, you might need to make really big adjustments and you want to make them early so you're not competing with everyone else when they cut their rate. So understanding where the market is and then also understanding how it compares to your data is super key. If you remember from the beginning of the video, I mentioned that we do have a free platform to help you see your pace and compare to historicals for your own portfolio. So if you don't have tools to be able to access this very easily, let us know. We'll get you set up. Now, when we go into September in Yosemite, we want to see if this pacing problem is continuing. And right now, we're at about 7.4%, which is pretty low. Now, granted, the seasonality is getting worse and worse, so we would expect that these booking windows to be short. But last year at this time, we were at about 15%, so almost double or slightly more than double what was on the books now was on the books at this time last year. Big red flag, same advice from August. You really want to make sure that you're getting ahead of the market. There's not been an indicator that these occupancy pressures are going to relieve themselves right now. And really, I always suggest people ask this because there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance between what you need in the business and what you see happening. But do you personally think things are going to get better from a consumer side? Are you planning to travel more? Are you planning to spend more money? Use that knowledge and decide to start making some adjustments to your pricing strategy now, because the goal is you really want to get on pace before we hit that prime booking window, right? If you wait till the very last minute, you're going to be competing with everyone else who's in this gap between this year and last year's occupancy. Now, there may be some hard decisions there. It's not always super early. And there are places where you may want to hold out, particularly if you have smaller portfolios or obviously really, really high-end homes. You maybe don't, you can't sell the same home twice. So, but especially if you have bigger portfolios, you do maybe want to take a more conservative bent. And that's something that you hear on the revenue management roundtables and other kind of professional revenue managers saying. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is asking rates. Asking rates are a really interesting metric because, Wheelhouse is a pricing platform. We are tracking all of the prices being advertised for both our direct partners, but also on every OTA. And asking rates is going to give us the average rates that people are posting to sell, right? It's a little different than ADR. ADR is telling us what people are buying and what, how that price is kind of coming, like for consumers who are coming into the system. Asking rate telling us what people are advertising. And I think this is a really good place to look when you're looking at market data to try to make revenue management decisions. The reason being, occupancy is going to tell us the demand, Asking rate is going to tell us how the market is responding to that demand and what the market is expecting out of the market. One of the things to look at here, and I think there's a big, asking rates are also helpful for kind of making these decisions because ADRs can be a little bit skewed. Oftentimes you see bookings that are really far in advance. And people, book at all different times. So you don't really know the booking window. Asking rates is really going to show us what's kind of going on right now. And so the first thing that sticks out to me here is you can see January, February through that low season, rates are pretty stable, right? There's slight increases in the average rates being posted by people in the market. However, once we get into April and beyond, we start to see that people in the marketplace are really holding pretty high premiums over what they were advertising last year. Now, part of the April stuff might be that Easter moved. You do see that some of those premiums dropped off in March by the end there, but you do see that the market seems to kind of consistently be holding higher rates, despite the fact that there's pressure on the occupancy. To me, this means that the market itself is not doing a great job of responding to the consumer. Now, keep in mind, this is the entirety of the market. We're not just looking at professionals. We're looking at kind of everything. So we're just kind of looking at the trends because for the consumer, they don't really care or maybe even know if you're a professional or how many units you have or what they're choosing. They're just looking at all the properties that are available. And at the market level, pretty much consistently from May, June, and July, we're seeing rates maintain a much higher position than they were last year, which honestly is a concern. I would think that people in the market would be responding to the fact that really since February, there has been pressure on the occupancy in the market. The consumer is not accepting the price that's kind of being put out there and buying at the same level that they were last year. Now, another thing that kind of sticks out to me is, July we're late in July and it really hasn't come down yet. So even though we're like deep in the market in the month, we haven't seen that response, and it seems to grow. These premiums seem to grow into August and September and October and November. To me, that indicates not only is the market not really responding well to the rate position at large, but the market is holding a lot of premiums, kind of like it's post-COVID. That post-COVID, like hold your rates high, wait till the last minute booked, that worked really well when there was a ton of demand. But in a situation where occupancy is under pressure, that's actually a strategy that's a liability, right? And if you listen to the professional revenue managers, particularly on our revenue management roundtables, that have big portfolios, they've talked a lot more about being more conservative and building a base of business and really making sure your rates relate to last year because there's not a lot of confidence that there's going to be significant growth this year. And so far, looking at the occupancy, there's not, right? Now, even though we look at this and we say, okay, the market might be overpriced, they're really not responding very quickly to things, that does mean it's an opportunity for those people paying attention, right? It does mean that the market share of people who are looking there, if you price your product correctly, and that doesn't mean going below what you're doing last year necessarily, you might be able to take quite a bit more market share, particularly if you do it early. The fact that July hasn't really dropped this rate down despite the pressure means that people are doing this in a very short window, if at all, in terms of changing their rates. That means if you're looking out into August and September and November or October and November, you might really be able to have an impact in terms of getting occupancy by just making small changes, and you have plenty of time to react to what's going on in the market if you start now. Big key, do whatever you can to get heads in beds in July, but really spend some of your revenue management time to look out into August and September because the market just does not seem optimized to the consumer because these rates are really high in what's being advertised, but these occupancies are low. Just to drill that home, I'm going to do a little filtering on this, and instead of looking at the entirety of the market, I'm just going to look at the top 20% of revenue performers. So we're talking the top performers by revenue in the market for their bedroom class. And this is a very different graph than what I was showing you when we looked at the whole market. When I look at the entirety of the market, rates are high. When I look at the top performers, you see a ton more conservatism and a lot more response to the fact that occupancy is down in the market. Q1, rates below what they were doing last year to try to drive occupancy. April, pretty marginal increase, but still increased. People seem to be a little optimistic in May, June, and July still, or at least May and June. They keep those rates high, but not as high as the market at large. And in July, they've already dropped some of that. So whatever the optimism they were hoping for in May and June, That's gone away in July, almost at what they were last year. And you can see while they're still holding premiums in August and September, those premiums aren't quite as big. And it's not until October that you kind of get the indicator that people are just holding premiums and not really paying attention. So to hammer that point home, the top performing properties in the market are being much more conservative to their rate position than they were last year, which contrasts starkly with the entirety of the market, which is still holding high premiums. Okay, let's jump over to Mammoth Lakes now and take a look at their trends. So I'm going to click on this trends button again. We're going to pull off 2023 and 2026 and just get an idea of going on. Now, obviously, Mammoth Lakes is going to be a little different than Yosemite. There's a ski market here, so we do see that Q1 is really that ski market high season. But like many ski markets in gorgeous mountain environments, there is a second kind of like what I've been calling a hobbit high season, like, you know, where they're like second breakfast. It's like second high season in the summer where you do get pretty strong occupancy showing, even if the rate position is not necessarily as high, right? And Mammoth has a little bit different story going on, right? Being a ski market, we see pretty strong performance across Q1, a little bit of an increase in January, like most markets around the country. January was really strong. A little bit of attrition in February, but not much, really still maintaining the high season. Honestly, a lot of people are going to book this in advance too, so you're bolstered by that. You don't really get affected by the, you know, you do because there's last minute stuff, but you know, there's a lot more on the books from earlier. And only in March do we start to see a little attrition, but you know, I don't know the specifics of what was going on this March in Mammoth, but ski markets tend to have pretty volatile Marches depending on weather and depending on Easter and things like that, right? So I'll chalk this up to pretty good Q1 across the ski market. As we get into the spring, April remains pretty strong. We do start to see a little bit of attrition, but probably not to alarm anyone. And as we get into the May mud season, it's a low occupancy time period. Many people probably aren't too worried about it, but this is where we start to see a little bit of a gap in the occupancy show up, right? So May not performing too well. There's a lot more mixed signals here though, right? So unlike Yosemite, where we see kind of consistent ups in occupancy, Mammoth has a lot of good news here, right? The occupancy's been able to be maintained. Now, I'm not looking at rates yet, so we don't know how that, like, I haven't shown you how that actualized, but it could be that people had to give up ADR to do it. But in general, able to maintain the demand level in the market. A little bit of bright spot for June as well is, even though there's a slight drop in June, it's very, very minimal and actually was able to maintain. Now, a big difference here is June is not a very high occupancy time period when we look at this market. So not really driving, you know, a big source of revenue, but it does look pretty decent. So the question becomes, how is July pacing, right? This kind of like second high season that you get with pretty good occupancy on the books. In Mammoth Lakes at this time, the market was at about 36%. So pretty much right on it. So this doesn't have as important of a seasonality as Yosemite, but it's definitely being competitive because you can see that the market is able to maintain the occupancy rate. We're pretty much right on pace. We're looking pretty decent here. So this is a big key for you, right? If we're 2 weeks away, you know that the market's actually doing pretty decent. Most people are probably doing okay. So you don't maybe have to panic that much if you're pacing on track. If you are not pacing on track though, do understand that the market isn't ahead and you may need to make some adjustments and really try to get those heads in beds and take the market share you can, because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of extra demand available right now. Now, going into August, we're dipping back down. Mammoth does not have as strong of a fall as we saw in Yosemite. Like that summer doesn't tail out into the Indian summer. And August, you know, we're at about 13%. So we're about a third of the way, a little less than a third of what was on the book last year. At this time last year, the market was at 17%. So we're starting to see a little gap in the pacing, right? Part of that could be that booking windows are shifting. I do have a hunch that part of why booking windows are shifting is because people are pricing too high. But we are starting to see a little bit of that gap appear. But it's not too bad, right? It's only about 4%. They're still within striking distance. And again, it really comes down to how you're pacing. If you're pacing really well, you probably don't have to worry about it. Just set a note to check it at the beginning of August and make sure you're still on pace. If you're pacing behind, you may want to start making some moves. We're 6 weeks till the end of August. We have a pretty short amount of time to make changes, but you do have time to make smaller changes and try to get your pace on track so that you're in a good position. Finally, we'll look at September. September is not a super strong period. In fact, it's barely higher than June. So really not going to be a super strong period. I would expect booking windows to be short here. But last year at this time, the market was at about 4%. So again, a little bit of a gap in occupancy, but not much. A lot of looking at this means not too much to panic about when we're looking at these things. But it really does come down to how you're pacing. If you're not getting the piece of market share that you're used to, you may need to make some changes. And again, this is another opportunity. Like, it's always worthwhile to look an extra season out, even if it's not a high season, because you probably, in these lower seasons, you always have homes that are unoccupied in previous years. And if you've had homes that have been unoccupied, there's no reason not to price them more competitively to just try and take market share, right? That just goes straight to your bottom line if you increase the occupancy on these buildings. If you can take the market share, it's going to be good for you overall. And if they weren't booked last year, they're an easy one to put forward, even if you have to offer them at a lower rate position, because there was no year over year bookings to kind of disrupt. Now, let's take a look at the asking rate situation in this market. So again, just a quick reminder, asking rates are the averages of what is being advertised. So where occupancy is going to show us the demand in the market, asking rates are going to show us how the market is responding and what the market expects out of different months. The first thing that I would like to point out here, looking at this, is it seems like many of the dates, like the market is a little bit more conservative. In Q1, you see some pretty modest increases on the rate, so not going crazy by posting much higher prices. A little bit different in April. That's probably due to Easter. We do see that kind of occur. And in May, June, and July, you do see increases. It's honestly, maybe a little more than I would expect in May because it's such a low season. But we know that outside of May, which had some weakness, the market's been able to maintain pretty decently. And so these increases are actually probably working out for a lot of people. Now, these aren't all super high occupied times. It's not like the true high season. So I would expect maybe a little bit more response, but it does seem like Mammoth is being more conservative than the property managers in Yosemite. They're not pushing as hard on the rate and maybe responding a little bit better. Now, there is some questions where like, hey, are they really capturing as much market share as they can, because they are still posting increases. But frankly, because these average rates are being advertised higher, that's working out for a lot of people because the market is on pace. Now, similar trend I did see to Yosemite is once we get into August and beyond, people are holding high premiums still into November, despite the fact that these are lower seasons. To me, that's really something that we see in this industry a lot is people don't have the bandwidth to focus on too much at once. And so they put premiums in advance thinking that that's going to be good. The really savvy revenue managers are looking out that extra season, making sure they're competitive and also pricing at something that's acceptable to their owners. And they're taking the market share from everyone else. I think that's a really important strategy, especially if you've had shortfalls this year, to try to make up for some of those shortfalls in the fall and focus on it now. Don't wait till September when everyone else is dropping their rates to be like, oh, maybe I should drop my rates. Make smaller drops now, get that pace up, and put yourself in a strong position proactively. Now, I've gone ahead and switched this to the high, and this is kind of interesting too. And I think this is partially because Mammoth really isn't being punished on the occupancy side. It's not under as much pressure. But if we just look at the top performing listings, the top 20% by revenue, you can see that in some cases, they've been able to capture more revenue, but they're really not being more conservative than the market. It actually looks really similar. Pretty much the market at large, high performers, mid performers, low performers are pricing a little bit higher than they were last year. There's being rewarded to some degree because they're on pace with last year. And in addition to that, you see these premiums further out. So this market doesn't seem to have gotten a shock that indicates to them, hey, we need when we looked at Yosemite, the top performers are looking further out and adjusting rate because that market's been under pressure. Here, we haven't seen that. The market hasn't been under a ton of pressure. The only month that was really majorly down was a low season month. And there's no real need for these property managers to make big adjustments to the rates. Now, again, that does represent an opportunity. One, the fact that rates seem pretty elevated in August, September, October, and November is a strong indicator that if you just want to drive more occupancy, focus out there, make some changes, because you don't have to do much to undercut your competitors, and it doesn't mean you have to go below what you're doing last year. Likewise, if you have been pacing behind or you have some shortfalls, you really need to focus on that time, because there's an opportunity now for you to try to capture market share and increase your occupancy without giving away the farm. All right, last thing I want to check with you guys is, because Mammoth Lakes is a ski market, in addition to its little second summer, I did want to pull up some lead time information for the Q1 high season. Because as we get into the fall, that's really, like I said before, you want to be looking out a season or even 2 seasons in advance to get the best revenue management possible. It's where you can make changes that don't give up everything that you have to do, but you can make smaller changes and really manage your pace and manage the flow of your pace much easier the further out you're looking. And as we get into fall, that's really where we're going to see the booking windows for these occur. So what I've done here is I've gone to this historical portion of the Wheelhouse Market Report, and I've gone to our lead time distribution chart. So it's going to break down how far in advance different percentages of the market, the bookings are coming in. And so I've gone to January 2024, so we're looking at last year's data, and we're just taking a look at kind of like, you know, where the peak booking times are. So one way to do that is to kind of look at the 50% mark. That's roughly going to be about where the median is, and that's about 30 to 35%. So your average booking window here is around 30 to 40 days, according to this data. That's pretty darn short, right? But keep in mind, that's the average booking window. That means like half of what's on the books is already on the books. You really need to not start paying attention then. You need to have been paying attention and be on track when you hit that 30 to 40 day window, because it's too late. Half of what's been booked has already been booked. So where I like to look is around the 80%. So where the first 20% of listings have been on, or even, you know, the first 10%. So this 20% mark is almost double amount of time. We're looking in that 55 to 65 window for the first 20% of reservations being on the books. And that's much further out, but still pretty short. And if we go to the 10% mark, it's really around 75 to 80. So you can see that that kind of dilates, that like the difference between 30 days and 60 days is really substantial, but it gets a little smaller because we don't go from 60 to 90, we go from 60 to 70. And so really that's telling us that like where you really want to be paying attention consistently, really making sure your pace is going, is around that 70-day mark at the market level. Now, something else to keep in mind here is I'm looking at all bedroom counts, but obviously that's going to include our small units that are going to drag that window down into a shorter window. Let's just look at the larger units, so 4-bedroom plus, and this will give us an idea. It's going to give us a good marker of like, when do I really need to be paying attention to the booking windows for the winter, and when should I start really maybe doing this on a weekly basis, making small changes, and really managing my pace. So when I look at the largest units, this is going to give us a little more idea of the people who are booking the most in advance, right? Because larger units tend to book further. So if we find that 50% mark, it's at 40. I mean, it's actually a little further. It's around that 40 to 50 day mark. So almost like when the market at large is kind of in its starting to book phase, you're already in the prime booking window for these larger units. So 2 months in advance from January, we're talking about beginning of November, so really the October timeframe, you really need to be on top of it with these big units, and you need to be making sure you're on pace by that time. Now let's go find the 20% mark. That 20% mark is going to be around 65 to 75. So again, not a huge gap there, but this is kind of that early spot, which is if we're in end of September, that's really when you need to be managing this regularly and making sure like, hey, I know that I'm prepping for the high season. I need to be looking at my high season pace and pickup and making sure that I'm comfortable with it on a weekly basis. And if we go a little bit further and go up to that 90%, that's getting us closer to 3 months. So if we go back, that's December, November, February, and then that means in September, we're really wanting to check that, maybe even towards the end of August. So we're really coming up on this time where, depending on what your portfolio makeup is, you really want to be starting to look at this on a daily basis and not do what we have seen in a few markets is hold these rate premiums too high. one thing to keep in mind is if we know those primary booking windows are coming up, but we look at this and we see, well, people really aren't making adjustments in their rate that early. Or if we go back to Yosemite, we see these big premiums in the 30 to 60 day window. That's a prime booking window. And already you can see for the high performers in Yosemite, they're already looking a little further. They're looking maybe 60 days out. But again, when we look at these booking windows for the high seasons in Mammoth, you even need to be a little earlier than that. So don't wait till you're in the season and you're in the middle in the prime booking window to start paying attention. You really want to know when to start paying attention to that early. Well, I hope you found that deep dive into Mammoth and Yosemite market data to be really helpful. Just a reminder, we looked at these entire markets, but we do have the capability in Wheelhouse to look at specific neighborhood or specific submarket data. If you'd like access and want to be able to generate market reports for those specific regions you're in, contact us. We'll help you get set up so that you can get to this market data for the most relevant group of listings possible. In addition to that, having access to this market data is free from Wheelhouse, but you also need to be able to compare your own pace and your own situation in your portfolio to really get the most out of what you're doing here. I mentioned that a lot in this conversation, really saying like, hey, if you're doing well, maybe consider this. If you're doing poorly, consider this. And for a lot of people, having access to those tools can be a little difficult. If you need access or want some very, very easy and quick views to specifically see your pace, Wheelhouse does offer that for free, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. If you'd like access to those free business intelligence tools, shoot us an email, get in contact with our staff. We're happy to help you get set up and also to provide some free training so you can make the best use of this and really make the most money you can out of 2025. Anyway, appreciate your time. Tell your friends if you found this interesting, and hope to see you next time.